Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 9th of July. I'm Erin Viner, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. An Ashkelon court has lifted a gag order revealing that 2 Israeli citizens are being held against their will in the Gaza Strip. Government officials say that an Israeli of Ethiopian descent slipped into Gaza last summer and is being held by Hamas, which the terror organization denies. IBA's Aryeh O'Sullivan is here to bring us up to date. Aryeh, what do we know so far?
Well, thanks a lot, Aaron. It's a scenario that Israelis loathe to be in, an Israeli citizen being held hostage by a terrorist organization. This is the situation, and has been since last September 7th, when Avraham Mengistu, a 28-year-old Israeli of Ethiopian descent, apparently sneaked into the Hamas-run Gaza Strip for unknown reasons. There are conflicting reports on whether he entered by land or by sea. Hamas has denied that he is still in their hands. They reportedly said that Mengistu had been arrested and questioned when he first entered the Gaza Strip, but that they released him and he may have crossed into the Egyptian Sinai or even attempted to return to Ethiopia. But Israeli security officials flatly dismissed this, saying he was definitely in Hamas' hands and they were holding him against his will. Security officials have also revealed today that a second Israeli citizen, a Bedouin from the Negev, is being held in Gaza. They did not say which group was holding him. Hamas held a rally last night gloating over holding the dog tags of Oron Shaul, an Israeli soldier who was killed in last summer's war. They also displayed 2 dog tags with question marks, perhaps alluding to the 2 missing Israeli citizens. Hamas also paraded new missiles in a show of force. The details of Mengistu are sketchy. His brother Ilan told reporters in Ashkelon today that his brother was not healthy and called on the government and the international community to work to win his release. He appealed to Hamas to immediately free his brother and urged the country to act with restraint. A gag order of Mengistu's capture had been in effect since he disappeared, but authorities allowed it to be lifted today, mainly due to repeated demands by some media outlets to report the case, but also out of the hope that now news of his capture could help spur negotiations for his release. The working assumption is that Mengistu is alive. A security official told Israel Radio that neither Mengistu's ethnicity nor the circumstances of his infiltration into Gaza were relevant, and that Israel has an obligation to return him. Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke to the Mengistu family and has appointed Colonel Lior Lotan, the head of the Prisoners and Missing Unit, to handle any negotiations to return Mengistu to Israel. The capture of Israelis in Gaza is particularly sensitive because of the prolonged Gilad Shalit saga, which ended when Israel freed more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners for his release after 5 years. Professor Gerald Steinberg, a military expert from Bar-Ilan University, said that this was a test now of vows not to let Gilad Shalit prisoner release set a precedent.
The Israeli government wanted to keep it secret precisely because they didn't want a Gilad Shalit situation. Gilad Shalit, the precedent that was set by having his father sit across the street from the prime ministers and essentially manipulating public opinion, his father, the media, in a strategic way, and forcing Prime Minister Netanyahu really to release hundreds of terrorists. That was a precedent that was deeply troubling. And Professor Asa Kasher, who is probably the most important moralist in terms of dealing with these kinds of, or ethical dilemmas, really came out very strongly yesterday, the day before, not to repeat the failure of the Gilad Shalit example, where Israel allowed itself to be blackmailed and taking tremendous security risks by releasing all these terrorists. That's the background of all of this. And I would be surprised if any kind of situation would lead to a repetition of the Shalit case. We're in a different situation now, and it's going to be difficult, very difficult. We're dealing with a human being, an Israeli, and Israel has an obligation to rescuing him. At the same time, cannot allow itself, we cannot allow ourselves to continue to be blackmailed through this kind of a process.
A short time ago, Likud member of Knesset Dr. Avram Naguse returned from visiting the Mengistu family in Ashkelon and said that the government is doing all that it can to secure the release of Israelis from Gaza.
I met the family and I discussed with them, with the father, the mother, and brothers and sisters. The family situation is very, very difficult. They are depressed. It's a very painful situation. It is a very hard situation for the family and for all the citizens of Israel. Citizens of Israel, we are worrying about the fate of Abraham Mengistu, who is citizen of Israel. it is not easy to see that a civilian person, a civil person, is now in the hand of Hamas. We don't know what is his fate. So we are calling to Hamas to release him immediately and to give us a sign of life about him.
President Reuven Rivlin today confirmed that all available information indicates Mengistu is being held by Hamas in Gaza and referred to his captivity as a humanitarian issue. During a visit to southern communities on the border with Gaza, the president said that he holds Hamas accountable for the state of the Israelis' health and welfare and that he expects him to be returned in good health. He also said that all the relevant authorities have been working on bringing the incident to a close as soon as possible since the moment Mengistu crossed the border. Neither the Cabinet nor the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee were reportedly informed about the captive Israelis until recently. Here with more on the situation and other updates from the Knesset is IBA's political correspondent Eli Wogelenter.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reportedly decided to manage the situation with as few people in the loop as possible. Only himself, the defense minister, the heads of the country's intelligence agencies, and the prime minister's missing persons and captives coordinator were informed of the kidnappings. Meanwhile, Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee Tzachi Hanegbi said he was never informed about the two men held in Gaza and that he had no idea about it until the incident was released for publication this morning. Former Minister and Security Cabinet member Yaakov Perry of Yesh Atid, himself a former head of the Shin Bet, told Army Radio that the previous government's cabinet was never informed of the captive and that he had only heard about it through former Knesset member Pnina Tamanu-Shata, who, like Avram Mengistu, is of Ethiopian descent. Tamanu-Shata said many ministers and MKs were aware of Mengistu's disappearance but did nothing. I think the government mishandled the case, she said. Turning to politics, Netanyahu's government was served its first legislative defeat in the Knesset yesterday thanks to a sneaky political maneuver from the opposition. A private bill submitted by Karen El-Harar of Yesh Atid, which calls for restricting debt collection to the city or town in which the debtor lives, passed its first reading 46-45, thanks to a trick straight out of an episode of the American television series West Wing. To fool the coalition, opposition MKs intentionally lost a vote just before the debt collection bill, and then, to give the impression of disorganization, a number of them left the Knesset plenum and waited just outside the door. Moments before the electronic vote on El-Harar's bill, the MKs rushed back into the plenum and voted. The plenum erupted in applause after the legislation passed. Yesterday's blow to the coalition is clearly a product of its razor-thin majority, but that could change. Netanyahu and Yisrael Beitenu head Avigdor Lieberman reached an agreement yesterday to cooperate on electing candidates to the influential Judicial Selection Committee. According to the deal, the Likud will back Yisrael Beitenu's candidate for a slot on the committee reserved for an opposition MK, and Yisrael Beitenu will support the Likud's candidate for a coalition slot on the committee. The agreement marks the first cooperation between the Prime Minister and Lieberman since Yisrael Beitenu rejected Likud's offer to join its coalition, and it's giving hope to the Likud that the 61 MK coalition could eventually expand. Yisrael Beitenu MKs noticeably absented themselves from key votes in the Knesset yesterday, enabling the coalition to pass them, except for that trick play. Meretz chairwoman Zahava Galon called Lieberman's party a fifth column in the opposition. In any case, if the government is to survive, they're going to have to convince the public that they're doing a good job. A poll out earlier this week showed that 27% of the general public gives the Likud-led government a grade of 0 on a scale of satisfaction from 0 to 5, while only 8.8% gave the government a grade of 5. But here's good news for Likud. Dissatisfaction with the Zionist Union Party is even greater, with the same 27% of the general public giving a grade of 0 for its performance at the head of the opposition, while only 3.5% gave it a grade of 5. The monthly Peace Index poll by the Israel Democracy Institute and Tel Aviv University was taken last week to mark the government's 50th day in office. Aaron?
Thanks for that report. And in other news, the second of two so-called deadlines in 10 days passed yet again for the signing of a nuclear deal between the world powers and Iran. Media sources in Tehran are claiming that the next target date has been set for July 13th, although Western officials are denying those reports. Ministers continue talks in Vienna today, following Tehran's insistence that conventional weapons and missiles have nothing to do with the atomic issue. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov called for the making of the lifting of the arms embargo against Iran a priority that should be carried out as soon after the signing of an agreement as possible. His deputy, Sergei Ryabkov, compared the current state of negotiations to alpinists climbing a peak, 95% completed, with the last few meters being the most difficult. Meanwhile, Tehran is said to have offered some new solutions to resolve the remaining differences, although Western officials appear to be unimpressed. U.S. President Barack Obama is now putting the likelihood of reaching a nuclear deal with Iran at less than 50%. He told a group of Democratic senators that the basic principle is that he will not accept a bad deal and certainly won't go along with an agreement deemed to be unenforceable. The president then repeated his assertion that he is in no rush for an agreement and prepared to walk away from the table if there's not a good deal. Meanwhile, a spokesman from the White House stressed that there is no concern that Iran is dragging out the talks as a cover for its nuclear program.
We saw a lot of Republicans, critics of the administration, suggesting that entering into talks with Iran were a really bad idea. Even Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, I believe, described it as a, quote, historic mistake. The fact is, after a year and a half or so, many Republicans are now suggesting that rather than trying to reach a final agreement with Iran, that what the administration should just do is leave the agreement that they previously criticized in place because it's been good for our national security. So the fact is, the concern that Iran could use diplomatic talks as cover for advancing their nuclear program is something that we were aware of from the beginning and actively took steps to prevent, and that effort has been successful.
A year after their murders, the grieving families of Gilad Sher, Naftali Frankel, and Eyal Ifrach gathered last night at the site where the boys' bodies were buried after their murders by Palestinian terrorists. The service was held to commemorate the launching of IDF Operation Brother's Keeper in search of the teenagers after their abductions. Soldiers involved in the mission were also present at the emotional ceremony, which culminated in song. An apolitical group of women have launched a symbolic collective hunger strike outside the Prime Minister's residence in Jerusalem to mark the anniversary of the conflict with Gaza, with a call for the resumption of peace talks with the Palestinians. IBA's Ari O'Sullivan spoke with one demonstrator.
I seriously believe that many Palestinians want what we want, but I think it's up to our leaders to do it and to take action. We believe they have the power, they have the ability. I do believe that everyone wants peace. Everyone wants quiet, especially us. We come from the Negev, and we always get hit the first and the hardest. We've been through a terrible summer last year. 73 wonderful soldiers were killed, and we don't want to see it happen again. We want to stop it.
Maybe you should be protesting in front of the Palestinian embassy or something.
The Palestinians would be a part of an agreement that would be signed. We have capable people on our side and on their side that want to reach an agreement, and we just have to restart it again.
The New York Stock Exchange appears to be operating as usual, resuming trade after a technical problem caused a major outage for more than 3 hours yesterday. The biggest suspension to strike a U.S. financial market in nearly 2 years came amid market turmoil in China, which is managing to even eclipse the debt crisis in Greece. U.S. stocks ended sharply lower Wednesday, with deepening concern that the 30% fall in Chinese shares within 3 weeks might not only seriously harm its own economy, but spread beyond its borders. The outage had little effect on overall trading volume, and an analyst at the PNC Financial Services Group downplayed the suspensions having had any major impact.
The reports that I've seen is not connected in any way to any cyber attacks. So the interesting thing is the New York Stock Exchange is not the hub of activity that it was maybe 10, 12 years ago. represents less than 0.25% of the daily trading volume. So business is getting done through the other exchanges. There's 11 other exchanges, a number of other private venues. So trading activity is getting done. So little impact on the market as far as an ability to execute trades, and I think market levels reflect that. The New York Stock Exchange also not only is a trading venue, but also acts as another capacity for administrative and pricing capacity, feeding the price into the exchanges. So some of those may be delayed or off a little bit for some time, but really very little impact as far as getting trades done. Big headlines, but not impact from a market standpoint.
The NYSE halt came shortly after United Airlines was forced to ground all mainline flights at airports nationwide over computer issues, causing a nearly 3% drop in the company's shares. The Federal Aviation Administration issued an order preventing any United flights from taking off after the airline experienced a system-wide network connectivity glitch. There were about 92 delayed flights during the shutdown, causing long lines at airports around the United States. The problem was resolved after nearly 3 hours, and operations then resumed. Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras convened a cabinet meeting this morning ahead of his pledge to deliver a detailed proposal on far-reaching financial reforms to unlock an aid package from international creditors. Eurozone leaders gave Athens until Sunday to come up with a deal, which requires approval by the full summit of the European Union leaders. The latest developments followed Tsipras' call for a public referendum this past Sunday, when a significant majority of voters rejected the austerity program demanded by Europe to keep Greece from plunging into bankruptcy and crashing out of the Eurozone. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has already announced that she will ask Parliament in Berlin to authorize the opening of loan negotiations if the Greek measures are deemed satisfactory. The day before Greece defaulted on a 1.6 billion euro International Monetary Fund loan, all the country's banks closed down, and they're not expected to open until at least next Tuesday. The 60 euro daily cash withdrawal limit remains unchanged, although a number of financial institutions are already running out of cash and have been forced to lower that amount to 50 euros. In today's financial developments, U.S. stock index futures were higher after Beijing's efforts to halt a rout in Chinese shares finally bore fruit, and the U.S. Federal Reserve signaled that it might hold off on raising interest rates. In local finance, the shekel today put in a mixed performance in foreign currency trading, while share prices on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange were up across the board. Here's a look at the afternoon numbers. The IBA weather team tells us we can expect a very pleasant weekend with fair to partly cloudy skies and slightly cooler temperatures. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. We hope you'll join us again tomorrow when I'll be back to bring you the latest breaking news from Israel. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a good evening and shalom from Jerusalem.